when scholars talk about the rate of agreements between these manuscripts and how you identify the relationships, when they're talking about 97.7% agreement, they're not talking about the whole text. They're talking about the variance. They're talking about where there is a variance in the text. And in fact, it gets down to a certain point where the computer just stops looking at it. It's about 87%, because that's where all the Byzantine manuscripts are. It just sort of stops looking at it at that point. That's on the variance, not on the actual text. So what we can now document beyond a shadow of a doubt is the massive agreement of the entire body of New Testament documents. Now, this has only been being done in Greek. There's no reason CBGM could not be applied to Latin other than the huge amount of time that it would take to do all the coding and the collations and transcriptions. Eventually that'll be done. Some poor group of graduate students will be punished in that way eventually, I would imagine. But there's no reason this could not be applied to the Old Testament as well, to the Hebrew Masoretic, to the Greek Septuagint. In time, I think eventually it will, if the Lord tarries, because it would take that amount of time. But still, the point is that what I see when I look at the CBGM data is the ultimate computerized refutation of the eighth article of faith of the LDS Church, in a sense. Because obviously there are Mormons who interpret the eighth article of faith translated as a translational issue, but the vast majority of Mormons have always understood that in a transmissional sense, that many plain and precious truths have been removed from the Bible. No, they haven't. And now we can document it. Because when you're talking about, when I look at I call it my manuscript, I do not own it, but P45, when I look at P45, I can bring up right now on my iPad here, its agreement, its coherence with all the other witnesses in the texts that it contains. It contains material from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. And in general, it's in the 90s. It's in the mid-90s. That's on the places where there's differences, which means that as far as the full text is concerned, that even P45, which has some idiosyncratic characteristics to it, is going to be 97 to 98% absolutely identical to everything else. The idea of editing, changing, removing, inserting, all the rest of this stuff, there is absolutely no room left for that kind of a theory anymore at all. Most people don't know why, but if you're familiar with the CBGM collations, you can just literally say, you want to try to say the New Testament has been edited and you've taken out doctrines, you've put in doctrines. The computer says, no, not possible. The level of agreement between all these manuscripts demonstrates one overwhelming truth. And that is, it was the intention of the vast majority of scribes to make faithful copies of what was before them, and they succeeded in so doing. All that stuff, the hyper-skepticism that Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman knows this stuff, by the way. I mean, he's not an expert in CBGM. He's sort of out of this field right now. But he well knows the fact that we know what the New Testament was originally about. I've told the story many times before, but it's one of my favorite stories. He was on an atheist webcast a number of years ago. And after talking about some of the variations in the New Testament, the atheist is like, so, Dr. Ehrman, what do you think the New Testament was originally all about? In light of all these changes, what do you think it was originally about? And you can hear Ehrman sort of go, it was about Jesus as the Lamb of God who gives his life so people can have their sins forgiven. I mean, he doesn't even actually know what to say because he's not really catching the idea. This guy is sort of going, do you think it might have been about space gods from Xenon or something like that, and some Scientologist thing, or space gods from Kolob for that matter. Whatever it might be. And he's like, no, we know what the New Testament was about. It's hard for me to believe that Barth doesn't realize what his writings what they communicate to people, but he acts like he doesn't. And so he's like, yeah, we know what it's about. We know the idea. There might be a few places we don't know here, there, or someplace else, but we generally know. Now we don't have to have him to confirm that in any way, shape, or form. CBGM makes it very, very plain that we have a incredibly coherent, consistent manuscript tradition, despite all the interruptions from Roman soldiers and everybody else down through history. And so it may be very, very popular in our culture for people to say, well, we just have no idea what was originally. That is documentably untrue.